The day they brought him back, it was raining, the kind of rain that seeps into the bones of an old house, whispering through its walls as if it remembers everything. I was sitting in this very chair by the window, my knitting half finished, the same cup of tea gone cold hours before, when the knock came at the door, that slow, deliberate knock. I already knew. I didn't need to see who it was. I didn't need to ask, because my heart, foolish thing that it is, recognized the rhythm of those 3 knocks, the same way it used to recognize his laughter from a mile away. They said his name like a confession. And then they told me he was gone, dead, and the woman he'd left me for, that lovely young thing with eyes like sunlight, she was the one who brought him back. In a coffin. I didn't cry, my dear. I thought I would. But after 40 years in this house, after all the words spoken and unspoken, my tears had already learned to dry themselves. You see, love doesn't end when someone walks away. It hides. Between the ticking of the old clock, behind the wallpaper, under the dust on the mantelpiece, it waits for you to remember. But perhaps I should start at the beginning, when this house still smelled of roses and bread, and my heart was still foolish enough to believe that love could be simple. He was called Thomas Hale, and he laughed, like he'd never been broken. He was a writer, or at least he liked to think so, though he spent more time staring at the typewriter than typing. I met him in the autumn of '59 at the village library, where I worked as an assistant. He had ink on his fingers and sorrow in his eyes. That combination has always been dangerous for women like me. We married the following spring, in a small ceremony behind St. Mary's Church. The whole village came, though I remember nothing, but the way he looked at me, like I was the ending to every story he'd ever tried to write. We moved into this house 2 weeks later. It was his mother's once, a tall grey building with ivy creeping up its sides, and a window in the attic that never opened. He said it was haunted. I said it was lonely. We were both right. Those early years, my dear, were made of laughter and thunder. We'd fight about the smallest things. Where to hang the painting, what to name the cat. But every night we'd find our way back to each other. He'd read to me by the fire, his voice low, the smell of tobacco curling in the air, and I'd believe him when he said forever, but forever has a way of changing shape when temptation knocks. It began with a letter. A small white envelope slipped under our door one morning. I found it before he did. There was no name on it, just the faint scent of lavender and a single word written inside. Remember. I asked him what it meant. He said it was probably a mistake, but his hands trembled when he folded the paper. From that day, the air between us began to shift. He'd stay longer at the pub. The typewriter would stay silent for days, and I'd find him standing by the window at night, looking toward the village road, as though expecting someone. I tried to ask. I tried to reach him. But love, when it starts to fade, becomes shy. It hides behind politeness and long silences. And soon, the laughter that once filled this house turned into the echo of footsteps, leaving every morning and returning too, late, smelling faintly of lavender. You know, my dear, when a woman knows, she just knows. We don't need proof. The heart whispers what the mind refuses to accept. I found the second letter in his coat pocket. This one said, "She doesn't understand you like I do." No signature again, but I didn't need one. Her name was Eliza Moore, a young poet who'd come to the village that summer. She was 20 years younger than me, with laughter like wind chimes and dreams too big for her own good. He met her at a writing club, and she listened to him. Sometimes that's all it takes. The day he left, he didn't pack much. Just his notebook, his shirts, and that cursed typewriter. He said he needed space, that his words had stopped breathing in this house. I told him they were still breathing. They were just tired of waiting for him to notice. But he didn't hear me. He kissed my forehead, out of habit, not love, and walked away. And the rain that night, oh, the rain. It hasn't stopped since. Not really. For months after, I lived with ghosts. Not the kind that rattle chains or slam doors, but the kind that live in the empty chair beside you, in the half-empty teacup, in the echo of footsteps that never come back. This house began to change too. The floorboards groaned louder. The clock started ticking slower. And sometimes, I'd hear the piano playing in the drawing room. Just 2 notes, over and over, though no one was there. Perhaps the house was mourning him too. I told myself I hated him. I even tried to. But hatred is just love that's lost its way. Every night I'd light a candle in the window. Not because I wanted him to see it, but because I couldn't bear the thought of darkness swallowing the house whole. That's the thing about love, my dear. Even when it leaves you, you keep lighting the way back. Then one morning, almost a year later, another letter came. Different handwriting this time. Sharp, hurried. It said only this: "He's ill. Please come." I didn't. Pride is a cruel comfort, and I had made my bed in it. 2 weeks later, she brought him back, in a coffin. When they carried him through that door, the house fell silent. Even the clock stopped ticking, as though time itself refused to move forward. Eliza stood there, soaked to the bone, holding the umbrella she'd used to shield the coffin from the rain. Her eyes were red, her lips trembling. Not with guilt, but grief. She said, "He wanted to come home." And I couldn't speak. There are moments, my dear, when forgiveness isn't a choice. It's the only thing left that keeps you human. So I told them to bring him in, right here, to the parlor, the same room where he'd once promised me forever. That night, I sat beside the coffin, the candlelight trembling like a heartbeat. I looked at his face, thinner, older, but still the man I'd once loved with everything I had. And then I saw it, tucked between his fingers. A letter, addressed to me. It read, "Ruth, I was wrong. I went looking for poetry in another soul, but all along, it lived inside you. I should have never left the house that smelled of your bread and your quiet forgiveness. If you ever forgive me, light the candle one last time. I'll know. I did light it that same night, and I swear, as the flame flickered against the window pane, the rain outside finally stopped. My dear, before I go on, if this story has touched your heart even a little, do subscribe and stay with me through the end. There's still more you must know, because forgiveness doesn't always arrive with peace. Sometimes it comes wearing sorrow's face. Tell me, have you ever forgiven someone who broke your heart? I'd love to hear your story too. Eliza stayed that night. I didn't ask her to, and she didn't ask permission. She simply sat across from me in the dim light of the parlor, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the coffin between us. The rain had stopped, but the sound of it lingered in the walls, like memory itself had soaked into the wood. For the longest time, neither of us spoke. There were no words that could make sense of what lay before us. Only the silence, deep and unending, like a prayer that had forgotten its purpose. It was she who finally broke it. "He spoke of you every day," she said quietly. Her voice was small, unsure, trembling at the edges. I didn't look at her. I just stared at the candlelight trembling against the polished wood of the coffin. "Did he?" I asked, not because I wanted to know, but because I wanted to see if she'd lie. "Yes," she said. "He missed you. He said he left his soul in this house." I almost laughed. The sound that escaped me was half sob, half sigh. "Then why didn't he come back for it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket, and pulled out a small envelope. Folded, creased, worn at the edges. "He wrote this for you," she said, placing it gently on the table beside the candle. "He made me promise to bring it if things went wrong." I stared at it, but I didn't touch it. I wasn't ready to know what apologies or excuses might be trapped inside those folds. The candle flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw his shadow move across the wall. This house has always known how to play tricks on the grieving. Did he suffer? I asked, after a long time. "No," she said softly. "Not at the end. It was quick." I nodded, though something in me didn't believe her. Thomas had never done anything quickly. He lingered in everything. In love, in regret, even in his silences. I rose from my chair and walked to the window. The garden outside was glistening. The roses bowed low under the weight of the rain. He'd planted those roses for me once, in the spring after our wedding. "So they'll bloom even when I forget," he had said. And they did, year after year, long after he left. Eliza stood, unsure of what to do. I turned to her, and for the first time, I really looked at her. She was younger, yes. Soft skin, trembling hands, eyes too full of guilt for her age. But she was not the villain I had imagined in my loneliest nights. She was just a girl who had believed a man's promises, like I once had. "Why did you come back?" I asked. "You could have buried him anywhere." Her eyes glistened. "Because he asked for you," she whispered. "He said he couldn't rest until he came home." Home. Such a simple word. And yet it carried the weight of everything I had lost. I wanted to hate her, to scream at her, to call her every name my grief could conjure. But when I looked at her trembling hands, I saw something else. The same pain that had lived inside me for years. Love had betrayed her too. She hadn't taken him from me. She had only borrowed him, and he had left her empty as well. We were two women standing at the same grave, mourning the same man in different ways. That night, when she went upstairs to rest, I sat alone with him once more. The candle had burned low, its wax pooling onto the table. I finally reached for the letter she had given me. My hand shook as I unfolded it. The handwriting was messy, the ink faint in places, as if written by trembling fingers. "Ruth, I've made a ruin of everything. She was kind, but she was not you. I thought I wanted freedom, but what I really wanted was to escape the mirror you held up to me, the one that showed me the man I had become. I am sick now, not just in body, but in soul. If this reaches you, I hope you found a way to forgive me. If I had one more day, I'd come back to that house and sit by the fire and listen to you breathe. I never deserved the kind of love you gave, but I carried it with me all the same. Thomas." The paper slipped from my fingers, and I let it fall. For a long time, I just sat there, the words echoing through me. It was strange. The pain didn't come as I expected. It wasn't sharp. It was quiet, almost tender, like an old wound being touched by gentle hands. I looked at his face one last time and whispered, "You always came home late, didn't you?" When morning came, the house felt different, lighter somehow. The air didn't press down on my chest the way it used to. Eliza came down, her eyes red but calm. She made tea in my kitchen with my cups. And for a moment, it was as if life had found its way back into the walls. We sat together in silence. Then she said something I'll never forget. "He told me he never stopped loving you, even when he didn't understand it. He said you were the only part of him that felt real." I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to tell her that love like that never disappears. It just changes shape, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. Instead, I reached across the table and took her hand. "We both loved the same man," I said softly. "That means we both lost him." She nodded, tears falling silently down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I," said, and somehow that was enough. Later, that day, after they took him to the churchyard, I walked through the empty rooms. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a heartbeat. In the bedroom, his old jacket still hung behind the door. I pressed it to my chest and breathed in what little was left of him. The faint scent of tobacco and rain. I didn't cry this time. I simply sat by the window and watched the light shift across the garden. The roses were still standing, even after the storm. That night, I lit the candle again. Not for him this time, but for myself. For the girl I once was, who believed in forever. For the woman I became, who learned that forgiveness is not weakness, but release. As the flame danced, I felt him there. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as something quieter, something peaceful. The kind of presence that doesn't need to be seen to be felt. My dear, if you're still listening, thank you for staying with me. Sometimes stories like these aren't just about love. They're about what's left when love is gone. Before I end tonight, tell me, have you ever let go of someone? Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because you did. If this story has touched your heart, do subscribe and stay with me through the next one. My name is Ruth, and this old house still has many more secrets to tell. It's strange, my dear, how silence can become a companion. After Thomas's funeral, the house seemed to breathe differently. The clocks ticked in softer rhythms. The wind hummed through the chimney like a lullaby instead of a lament. I thought that was the end of our story, his and mine. But I should have known better. Some stories do not end with death. They linger, waiting for you to open a drawer, to lift a curtain, to remember something you were never meant to forget. A few weeks after the funeral, Eliza left. She stood by the doorway in her black coat, suitcase in hand, and said she couldn't stay in a place where his ghost might still walk. I didn't stop her. I only nodded, and she said softly, "He loved you more than you'll ever know." Then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the stone path. The silence that followed was heavier than any grief I'd known before, but I found comfort in small things. The smell of tea steeping in the morning, the creak of the floorboard, by the piano, the warmth of the fire when the evenings turned cold. For a while, life felt almost ordinary again. I cleaned his study one morning, finally ready to face the room he'd filled with words I was never allowed to read. Dust lay thick across everything. The typewriter, the notebooks, the shelves of yellowed books. As I wiped the desk, my hand brushed against a loose floorboard. It shifted slightly under my weight. I knelt, curious, and pried it open. Inside was a small tin box, rusted at the edges. I hesitated before opening it. There's something sacred about secrets, isn't there? Once you lift the lid, you can never pretend you didn't. But curiosity, that stubborn ghost of youth, whispered louder than caution. I opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me, every single one written in his handwriting. My breath caught. I unfolded the first one. The date on it was from years ago, long before he ever left. My Ruth, you. Don't see it, but every story I try to write ends with you. I fear that one day I'll lose you. Not to another man, but to the silence that grows between us. I keep these letters hidden because I don't know how to say these things to your face. You'd laugh at my dramatics. But I want you to know, even when I seem far away, I am trying to find my way back to you. I read every letter, one by one, as the sun moved slowly across the window. They told the story of a man lost inside himself. A man who feared he wasn't enough, who loved deeply but never learned how to show it. The later letters grew darker, filled with guilt and confusion. In one he wrote, "I met someone who reminds me of who I used to be. She makes me feel young again. I don't love her, not the way I love you. but I can breathe around her. I don't know what that means anymore. Maybe it means I'm broken. I sat there for hours, surrounded by the ghosts of his words. Every letter was a confession, and every confession, a wound I hadn't known I carried. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something else, a strange quiet empathy. He had been a man drowning in his own loneliness, and I had been too proud to throw him a rope. Love fails, my dear, not always because it dies, but because we forget how to speak it. As I placed the letters back in the box, I noticed one envelope tucked beneath them, sealed with a small piece of red wax. It was newer, the ink darker, the handwriting unsteady. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Eliza. I hesitated, then opened it. Eliza, I know you'll hate me for this, but I cannot do this any longer. I have tried to make you happy, but I am only reminding you of what I am not. My heart still beats for her, no matter how I try to silence it. I don't know how to live with that kind of truth. I'm sorry. Please don't follow me. My hands trembled. So that was it. He hadn't just fallen ill. He had left this world by his own hand. And she, the woman he left me for, had carried that burden in silence, all the way to my doorstep. She had brought him home, not out of duty, but out of love. Twisted by guilt, the realization hollowed me. I sat there until the fire went out, until the house grew cold again. I wanted to hate him for it, for the cowardice, for the betrayal. But I couldn't, because I knew that pain, the ache of living with the weight of your own choices. I whispered into the darkness, "You could have come home. You always could have come home." That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again. The piano, 2 soft notes, played slow and hesitant, as though testing the air. I rose, my heart pounding, and followed the sound to the parlor. The room was empty, of course. The candle I'd left on the mantel flickered weakly, casting shadows across the floor. But the piano lid was open. I hadn't touched it since the day he left. I sat on the bench, my fingers hovering over the keys. For a moment, I didn't recognize my own reflection in the black varnish. Then, almost without thinking, I played the same 2 notes I'd heard. They rang through the stillness, soft and haunting. And then I remembered. Those were the first 2 notes of a song he'd written for me, all those years ago, on the night he proposed, a song he'd never finished. My dear, before I continue, if this story has found its way into your heart, do subscribe and stay with me through the end. There's still more to tell, and what comes next is not just about love or loss. It's about what remains when the echoes of both have faded. Tell me, have you ever discovered a truth you weren't ready to face? I'd love to hear your story too. When I finished playing those 2 notes, I felt it. A shift in the air, a warmth behind me, as though someone had placed a hand on my shoulder. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Some presences don't need proof. They only need to be felt. And for the first time in years, I whispered, "Welcome home, Thomas." The next morning, the house felt different. It wasn't just the light, it was the stillness. The kind of quiet that doesn't press against you, but settles softly, like forgiveness taking a seat beside you. I made tea the way I always did, 2 cups out of habit, one for me and one for him. Old routines are hard to let go of. I sat by the window, the steam curling up like ghosts of words never spoken, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Later that day, I went to his study again. The letters were still on the desk where I'd left them. The tin box open, the truth no longer a secret, buried under the floorboards. I decided I would not hide them again. I placed them all in a drawer by the fireplace. His words, my answers unspoken, our story complete. And yet, something inside me whispered that there was still one more piece missing, something I hadn't yet understood. As I moved the box, a small folded paper slipped out and fell onto the floor. It wasn't a letter. It was a sketch, his hand-drawn lines, shaky and uneven, but I would have known them anywhere. It was a drawing of me, sitting by this very window, knitting, my hair tied back, my face calm, a small smile barely visible. At the bottom, in faint pencil, he had written, "Home." I sank into the chair, clutching that piece of paper like it was the last heartbeat of something beautiful. All the bitterness, all the anger that had lived inside me began to crumble. For years, I thought he had abandoned me for love, but maybe he had only been searching for a part of himself that he had lost here, with me. Long before Eliza ever came along, that evening, I decided to visit his grave. I hadn't been since the funeral. I couldn't bear to. But the wind was gentle, the sky low and grey, and something inside me told me it was time. The churchyard was quiet, just the sound of the grass swaying and the crows calling in the distance. I found his name on the stone, simple and unadorned. Thomas Hale, beloved husband, 1934, 1981. I traced the letters with my fingertips and whispered, "You were always afraid of endings, weren't you?" I sat there for a long time, speaking softly to the earth. As though he might still be listening, I told him about the house, about the roses that bloomed again, about how Eliza had gone and the piano had started to play on its own. I told him I'd found the letters. I told him I understood now. And when I finally rose to leave, the strangest thing happened. The wind picked up, and a single petal from the rose bush nearby drifted down, landing right where my hand had been. I smiled. "All right then," I whispered. "I'll take that as goodbye." When I returned home, the house felt warmer, though I hadn't lit a fire. I walked into the parlor, and there on the piano, I saw something I hadn't left there. A single rose, deep red, lying across the keys. I froze. The windows were closed, the doors locked. But the rose, it was fresh, the petals soft, as if someone had just placed it there. I didn't feel fear, not even surprise, just peace. I sat down at the piano, the rose still beside me, and played those two notes again, his unfinished song. And then, for the first time, I kept playing. The melody came naturally, as if the notes had always been waiting for me. It was soft, sad, and beautiful, the sound of two souls forgiving each other across time. When the song ended, I closed the piano lid gently and whispered, "Now it's finished." I placed the rose in a small glass of water and set it by his photograph on the mantel. The house was quiet again, but not empty. It felt full, whole, in a way it hadn't been in years. That night, as I sat by the fire, I thought about Eliza. I wondered where she was, if she had found peace too. I wrote her a letter, not one of accusation or blame, but of understanding. I told her that she had given me something precious, the chance to forgive, that Thomas's death had not just brought him home, it had brought me back to myself. I never sent it, of course. Some letters aren't meant to be delivered. Some are just meant to free you. Days turned into weeks, and the season began to change. The roses in the garden bloomed brighter than ever. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive again. Sometimes I still hear the piano, faintly from the parlor, as if someone's practicing a melody they've finally learned. And when I do, I smile and whisper, "You can rest now, my dear. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you." Stories like this are not just memories. They are pieces of our hearts stitched into words. Before I end tonight, tell me, have you ever found peace in something that once broke you? I'd love to know. And if this story has touched your heart even a little, do subscribe and stay with me through the next one. My name is Ruth, and this old house, it still remembers. If you stayed with me till the end, my dear, thank you. Tell me the time and country you're watching from in the comments. It warms my old heart knowing where my stories travel. It's strange how time moves differently in an old house. The clocks tick, yes, but they do not keep time. They keep memories. Some mornings I wake and the air feels like it belongs to another year entirely. As though if I were to open the door, I'd find Thomas standing by the gate again, his coat collar turned up, his eyes searching for forgiveness he never asked for. Perhaps that's what grief truly is. A house you keep living in, long after its other occupants have gone. It had been a few months since that night at the piano, since the rose. I'd begun to settle into the quiet, to live with it like an old friend who never asks questions. But one evening, as the rain lashed against the windows, something changed again. I heard a soft sound coming from upstairs. Not the piano this time, but the creak of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving along the corridor above my head. I told myself it was the wind, or the pipes, or my own imagination feeding on the silence. But then, a whisper. My name, Ruth, clear as day, as if someone had leaned close to my ear. My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just sat there in my chair, staring at the ceiling, the rain roaring louder outside. And then I whispered back, "Thomas." There was no answer, just the faint click of the upstairs door closing. I lit a candle and climbed the staircase slowly, the flame trembling, as if it too was afraid. The air grew colder with each step. The house seemed to breathe around me, its wooden bones sighing with the weight of years. When I reached the landing, I saw that the door to the guest room, the one we never used, was slightly open. I pushed it gently. The room was empty, of course. Just the old wardrobe, a bed covered with a white sheet, and the faint scent of dust and lavender. But there was something on the bedside table that hadn't been there before. A small envelope, yellowed and brittle, my name written across it in his handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The ink was faded, but still legible. The letter was dated 2 days before he left me all those years ago. I sat down on the edge of the bed and read it, slowly, my eyes blurring halfway through. He wrote that he couldn't stay. Not because of her, not entirely. He wrote that something inside him had begun to fade, that he felt himself slipping away into a darkness he couldn't explain. He said he feared he would become someone cruel if he stayed, that the man I loved was already being swallowed by something heavier than guilt. "I am not leaving you for another woman," he wrote. "I am leaving you because I am already gone." I pressed the paper to my chest and cried. The kind of cry that doesn't make a sound. The kind that comes from deep inside your bones. I realized then that I had been angry at a ghost all this time. I had built walls around my heart to keep out a man who had been trying, in his own broken way, to protect me from himself. When I finally looked up, the candle had burned low. The flame flickered once, twice, and then went out. I was sitting in the dark, the letter in my lap, the rain easing outside, and that's when I saw it. In the mirror across the room, a faint reflection that wasn't mine, a figure standing by the window, looking out into the night. His shoulders were the same, the way he held his hands, the same. I didn't move. I just whispered, "You can rest, Thomas. You can rest now." And the reflection turned, just slightly, as if to look at me one last time. And then it was gone. I went to the window, my hand on the cold glass. The garden below shimmered with rain, the roses bending under the weight of water. A faint trail of footprints led from the gate to the edge of the house. Just 2 prints, then nothing. I stood there for a long time, watching the rain wash them away. The house felt lighter afterward, as if something had finally left it. And yet, part of me missed the heaviness, the presence I had lived beside for so long. The next morning, I opened every window in the house, let the air in, let the light touch every corner. I made fresh tea, placed a cup by his photograph, and whispered, "You're free now, my love." That day, I found the courage to open a room I hadn't stepped into since the day he left, his painting room. The door creaked in protest, the smell of old turpentine filling my nose. The canvases leaned against the walls, covered in dust sheets. One by one, I uncovered them. Portraits, landscapes, sketches. But one caught my eye immediately. It was unfinished, just like the melody he'd left behind. A painting of me, again, sitting by the piano. But this one was different. Behind me, in the painting, he had drawn himself, standing in the doorway, looking at me with such sorrow and tenderness that it broke my heart all over again. And at the bottom, faintly, penciled in, were the words, "For when I'm gone, so you'll remember I never really left." I spent that evening sitting in his painting room, surrounded by the smell of oil and dust as the sun disappeared behind the hills, and the world turned the color of old paper. There was something sacred about that silence. I could almost hear his voice in the creak of the floorboards, see his shadow in the fading light. I ran my hand gently across the surface of that unfinished painting, the one of me at the piano, and felt the rough texture where his brush had stopped mid-stroke, as if he had been called away and never returned. Perhaps, in a way, he never truly did. I thought about all the unfinished things in our lives, the conversations that ended in silence, the apologies never spoken, the mornings that turned into years. So much of love is left half done, isn't it? Like a painting that never finds its last color. I used to believe that meant it wasn't real, that something incomplete couldn't be beautiful. But now, sitting there in that quiet room, I realized how wrong I had been. Sometimes it's the incompleteness that makes something last forever. I took a small brush from the jar by the window, dipped it in the faintest shade of grey, and made a single stroke, just one, on the side of the piano in the painting. Then I whispered, "There, now it's finished." It wasn't perfect, but neither were we, and maybe that was the point. Later that night, I walked through the house barefoot, the floorboards cool against my feet. Every corner of this place carried echoes, the laughter that once filled the halls, the quiet arguments over tea, the soft good nights. I paused by the staircase, looking up into the dark. That was when I saw something faint, the outline of a man at the top of the stairs. My heart didn't race this time. I just smiled. "You can go, Thomas," I whispered softly. "You've been home long enough." The shadow seemed to fade with the next flicker of the candlelight, as if carried away by the same air that once held his laughter. I felt a warmth settle over me, not from the candle, but from somewhere deeper. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted. I felt held. In the following days, the house began to change. The piano no longer played on its own, but I found myself sitting at it more often, playing the tune we'd started together. The roses by the window grew wild again, climbing higher than they ever had before, their petals brushing against the glass. Even the air felt softer, as though it too had forgiven. Then one morning, as I was dusting the mantel, I noticed something tucked behind his photograph, a tiny brittle scrap of paper. I pulled it free, and there in his familiar handwriting, just a few words. "When you find this, I'll be waiting by the garden gate." I felt tears rise before I could stop them. I opened the door and stepped out into the garden. The morning dew cold on my shoes. The air smelled of earth and memory. I walked to the gate, my heart trembling with a strange mix of grief and peace. Of course, there was no one there. Just the sound of the wind brushing through the leaves, the sunlight spilling over the roses. But I swear for a moment, I felt a hand brush mine. Warm, steady, and familiar. I closed my eyes and whispered. I know, I stayed there for a long time, letting the world breathe around me. The birds sang, the leaves whispered, and I felt something unshackle inside me. Like the closing of a story that had waited too long for its ending. I walked back into the house, leaving the gate open behind me, as if to let him come and go, as he pleased. That night, I lit a fire and sat beside it with a cup of tea. I thought about love, how it changes, how it lingers, how it becomes something different when people leave, but their memory doesn't. I realized forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's something you do every day until your heart grows, quiet enough to stop asking why. And that's what I've been doing ever since, forgiving, slowly, softly, every morning, every night. My dear, if you've made it here with me, thank you. This old heart has carried many stories, but this one taught me how to breathe again. Tell me, have you ever learned to forgive someone long after they were gone? I'd love to hear. And if this story has touched your heart, even in a small way, do subscribe and stay with me till the next one. The winter that followed was the gentlest I can remember, the kind that doesn't bite or howl. It just lingers, quietly, like an old friend who refuses to leave without one last goodbye. The house looked softer under the snow, its sharp edges blurred into something kind and forgiving. I would sit by the window most mornings, wrapped in my wool shawl, watching the world turn white, and I'd think, perhaps this is what peace looks like. Not the absence of pain, but the stillness that comes after you've wept enough for it. But peace, my dear, is a fragile thing. It doesn't always stay when you ask it to. It comes and goes like sunlight behind clouds. And that winter, though, the house was quiet and kind to me. It brought with it one more secret, one I never expected to uncover. It began on a Sunday afternoon, the air thick with the scent of burning wood. I was dusting the bookshelf when an old volume fell from the top. A leather-bound diary I hadn't seen before. Its cover was worn, the edges curled, the pages fragile as old lace. When I opened it, my breath caught. The handwriting wasn't mine. And it wasn't Thomas's either. It belonged to her, Eliza. For a moment, I couldn't move. My fingers trembled as I traced her delicate cursive. The ink faded, but still alive. I had never met her in person. I had only known her name, whispered in rumors, carved in pain, buried in silence. But here she was, speaking to me through time. The first page began like a confession. If you are reading this, she wrote, then perhaps I have already done what cannot be undone. I felt the air tighten around me as I kept reading. She wrote of guilt, of a love she hadn't meant to begin, of how Thomas came to her, not as a lover, but as a man broken beyond repair. She wrote that she tried to send him back to me, that she knew he belonged here, in this house, not with her, but she said he was too afraid, not of me, but of himself. And then, on one page near the end, she wrote something that made my hands go cold. He said your name when he died. I had to stop reading then. The room seemed to tilt around me. My knees gave way, and I sat on the floor, the diary open across my lap. He said my name. After everything, after all the silence, all the distance, all the hurt, the last word he spoke in this world was mine. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the fire, the diary still open, There was more written there, I knew, but I wasn't ready yet. Forgiveness comes in waves, and that one knocked the breath out of me. That night, I dreamed of the garden again, but this time, it wasn't overgrown. The roses were in bloom, pale and perfect under a soft moonlight. I saw Thomas standing by the gate, as clear as day, and beside him, Eliza. Her face was kind, her eyes filled with something like sorrow and grace. They didn't speak. They just stood together, watching me. Then she smiled, faintly, as if to say, "He's all right now." When I woke, there were tears on my pillow, but they didn't hurt this time. They felt like release. Decided to read the rest of the diary that morning. The last entry was dated a few days before his passing. In it, she wrote, "I am bringing him home, not because I want to, but because I know it's where he'll finally rest. I only pray she forgives me for being the one to do it." She had known. She had carried the weight of that goodbye all the way here, and all those years I spent resenting her, imagining her as a thief. She had been just as haunted as I was, perhaps even more. I closed the diary gently and placed it beside his letters on the mantel. For a long time, I just sat there, the snow still falling outside, and whispered, "You were forgiven long before I knew your story." My dear, before I go on, if you've been with me through this far, I want to thank you. You and I, we're not so different, you know. We all carry ghosts we've tried to silence. We all hold names in our hearts that never quite fade. Tell me, have you ever found understanding in someone you once thought you hated? I'd love to hear. Now, where was I? Ah, yes. The night the snow melted, the piano played again. But this time, it wasn't a melody of sorrow. It was something new, something whole. I remember that night so clearly. The night the snow melted and the piano began to play again. It was late, long after the world had fallen asleep. The kind of silence that feels like you could hear a memory breathing filled the house. I had fallen asleep in my chair by the fire, the diary still open beside me, the embers painting the room in shades of gold and ghostlight. That's when I heard it, those soft notes floating through the air, gentle and careful, like hands, touching something sacred. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But when I opened my eyes, the music was still there, spilling from the parlor. Not mournful this time, but tender, curious, alive. I rose slowly, the floor cold beneath my feet, and followed the sound. The door to the parlor was slightly ajar, the faintest light flickering through the crack. I pushed it open, half expecting to see nothing but shadows. But there it was. The piano, the same one that had haunted this house for years. Its keys, moving softly on their own, and beside it, standing in the faint glow of the firelight, was a figure. Not Thomas, not entirely, but something that felt like him. The memory of his presence. The air shimmered faintly around him. His shape formed of light and dust and old love. He didn't look at me. He just kept playing, his fingers tracing the melody we'd begun together so many years ago. I stood there, watching, tears sliding silently down my cheeks. I didn't move closer. I didn't speak. It felt like one of those moments too sacred to touch, where words would only ruin what silence already understood. The music grew softer, slower, until the final note lingered in the air like a breath waiting to be exhaled. And then he turned to me, his eyes. Oh, his eyes were exactly as I remembered them. Kind, tired, and filled with something infinite. For a moment, I thought he might speak, but he didn't need to. I already knew. He smiled, just a small, grateful smile. And then he was gone. The piano fell silent, the air stilled, and I was alone again. But it wasn't the same kind of alone I had once feared. It was gentle, peaceful, full. I sat down on the bench where he had stood and laid my hand on the keys. They were still warm. I whispered, "Good night, my love," and played a single note, the one he had left unfinished, and with that, I closed the lid. The next morning, the world had changed. The snow had melted, the sun had returned, and the garden was alive again. I opened the windows and let the air pour in, carrying with it the scent of earth and rain. I walked out to the gate, the same one where I had last felt his hand brush mine, and saw something there that made me smile. A small wooden carving, half buried in the soil, smoothed by time and weather. It was in the shape of a heart. I picked it up, brushing the dirt away, and realized it wasn't new. It was his. Thomas used to carve little shapes out of wood when he couldn't sleep. I'd forgotten all about them. On the back, faint but still visible, were the words, "For Ruth, always." I held it close to my chest, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath my feet. That was the moment I finally understood. He hadn't just been brought back to me in a coffin. He had been brought back in forgiveness, in memory, in every breath this house still took with me. The walls that had once held our pain now held our peace. I placed the carving on the mantel beside the letters and Eliza's diary. 3 stories that had once been separate, now bound together in one quiet truth. I lit a candle for both of them, not out of sorrow, but gratitude. The flame flickered softly, casting a warm light across the room. That night, I made tea for 3. 1 cup for me, 1 for Thomas, 1 for Eliza. I sat them side by side on the table and whispered, "No more ghosts, just love." The house sighed, as if in agreement, and that's how it's been ever since. No more shadows in the hall, no more whispers from the attic, just peace. Sometimes I still hear the faint sound of a piano key pressing in the night, but now it makes me smile. It's not a haunting anymore. It's a memory saying good night. My dear, if you're still here, listening to this old woman's story, thank you. You've kept me company in ways you can't imagine. Tell me, have you ever felt someone's love linger long after they were gone? I'd love to hear your story. And if this one has touched your heart even a little, do subscribe and stay with me till the end. Spring arrived like a sigh of relief that year. The air grew softer, the mornings brighter, and the house, my old secret-filled house, seemed to breathe differently, as though it too had finally learned how to let go. The roses in the garden bloomed early, their petals heavy with dew, and the scent drifted through the open windows, wrapping around the halls like the echo of a lullaby. For the first time in decades, I felt no weight on my chest when I woke. No shadows whispering from the corners. Just light. Just peace. I had grown used to silence by then. Not the lonely kind, but the kind that feels earned. The kind that follows after you've made your peace with the past. Some mornings, I still brewed 2 cups of tea, placing one beside his photograph. Old habits die slower than people do. I'd sit by the piano and hum the tune we finished together that night. But it no longer made me cry. It made me remember. It was on one of those mornings that something strange, yet beautiful, happened. The postman delivered a parcel addressed to me, but the handwriting on it wasn't familiar. There was no return address, no name, just to Mrs. Ruth Hale, the house by the roses. I almost laughed. Everyone in the village knew that name belonged to me. When I opened it, I found a small wooden box wrapped in faded blue cloth. Inside lay an old silver locket, tarnished by time but still shining faintly in the light. I opened it carefully, my heart tightening. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, one of Thomas and the other of Eliza. Beneath them, a folded piece of paper rested, My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The message was written in a delicate, almost hesitant script. He spoke of you until his last breath. I kept this because I didn't know how to let him go. But now I understand. He was never truly mine to keep. I believe he belongs here, with you, where his story began. E. I pressed the locket to my chest and felt tears rise. Not from pain, but from the soft ache of closure. Somehow, even after all this time, Eliza had found her way back into this story. Perhaps she was still alive somewhere, old and quiet like me, trying to make peace with the past in her own way. Or perhaps this was her last act, a goodbye carried across years and distance. That evening, I went out into the garden. The sun was setting, the sky painted in soft golds and pinks, and the air smelled of roses and rain. I dug a small hole by the gate, the place where I'd last felt Thomas near me, and I buried the locket there. It felt right, two souls who had both loved, both erred, both carried too much, resting together, finally. When I covered the soil and stood back, I whispered, "You're both home now." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of roses through the air, brushing against my face like a soft hand. I smiled, closing my eyes. That night, I dreamt again, the same dream, the garden, the moonlight, the gate. Only this time, I wasn't alone. Thomas was there, standing by the roses, his hand outstretched, and beside him, Eliza, her face calm, her smile warm. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. Thomas took my hand, and I felt no pain, no regret, just love. A quiet, eternal kind of love. When I woke, there was sunlight streaming through the window, and the sound of birdsong filled the air. For a moment, I thought I heard a piano key, pressed softly, just one, as if to say, "We're still here." I got up, made my tea, and opened the curtains. The roses by the gate were in full bloom, brighter than I'd ever seen them. And there, lying just beneath them, was something glinting in the morning light. I walked over, my heart thudding softly, and found it. The silver locket, the same one I had buried the night before, but it was different now. The portraits inside had faded completely, replaced by a single blank space, like a page waiting to be written on. I smiled and whispered, "Perhaps some stories never end. They just begin again." My dear, before I go on, if this story has reached your heart, stay with me. There's one last thing I want to tell you. Something I learned only when the house finally spoke its last secret. Tell me, have you ever felt as though love could travel through time, finding you no matter how far it has to go? The night the house gave up its last secret, I felt it before I saw it. The air grew heavier, as though time itself had paused to listen. I was sitting by the fireplace, the flames casting long shadows across the old walls, when I heard it. The faint sound of a piano key, pressing somewhere in the dark. Just one note, soft, lingering, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. I froze, my teacup trembling in my hand. That piano hadn't played itself in years. And yet, there it was. One note, then another, and another, forming the same melody. Thomas and I had written together all those years ago, the song that had once filled our hearts, our home, and later, our silence. I rose slowly, my cane tapping against the wooden floor. The house was dimly lit, but the moonlight spilling through the windows guided me. I followed the sound through the hall, past the portraits, past the memories that seemed to lean out of the shadows and watch me go. The melody was faint, echoing from the music room, the room I had kept locked for decades. But tonight, the door stood ajar, the light inside flickering gently like candlelight. When I stepped inside, I didn't feel afraid. The air was warm, and the scent of roses filled the room. The piano sat where it always had, dust resting like a veil on its surface. But the keys moved softly, as if touched by invisible hands. I stood there, unable to breathe, my eyes wet with tears. And then I saw it. Faint outlines forming in the glow. Thomas, sitting at the piano, his figure half made of light, half of memory. He didn't turn, but I knew it was him. I knew the way his shoulders curved, the way his head tilted slightly when he played. I took a step forward and whispered, "Thomas." He stopped playing, and for a long moment the room was silent, except for the sound of the fire crackling in the hall. Then he turned to me, and though I could barely see his face, I could feel the warmth of his smile, gentle, familiar, and endlessly sad. "You waited," he said, his voice barely more than a breath. "I always did," I replied, my voice shaking, even when I shouldn't have. He stood and came closer, the room pulsing softly with his presence. "You never stopped loving Ruth, not even when it hurt." "I tried," I said, a tear slipping down my cheek. "But love doesn't fade just because it's broken. It waits, like the echo of a song." He reached out, his hand hovering near mine, and for a moment, just one fleeting heartbeat, I felt warmth, real warmth. Then he looked past me, toward the window, where the moonlight had turned silver against the glass. "She forgave me too, you know," he whispered. "Eliza," she said, "love is not a possession, it's a promise." I closed my eyes, the tears falling freely now. "Then promise me, Thomas," I said softly. "Promise me this is peace." He nodded once, the faintest hint of a smile crossing his lips. "It is, Ruth. For all of us." The light around him began to fade, like mist dissolving into dawn. I wanted to reach out, to hold him, to say everything I never said. But instead, I whispered, "Good night, my love." And just before he vanished completely, he said, "Good night, my heart." When I opened my eyes again, I was alone. The piano was still, the house quiet once more. But something had changed. A heaviness lifted, a silence transformed. The past no longer haunted these walls. It lived peacefully within them. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The seasons changed again, and with them, so did I stopped locking doors. I started baking again, letting the scent of cinnamon fill the kitchen. Children from the village would sometimes visit. Drawn by the stories I told by the fire, they called me Grandma Ruth. Even those who weren't mine. I'd tell them tales of love, of mistakes, of forgiveness. And every so often, when the wind was just right, they'd hear the faint sound of a piano playing somewhere in the distance. I never told them what it meant. Some stories are meant to be felt, not explained. One evening, as I sat by the window, watching the sunset bleed across the sky, I felt a deep calm settle over me. The house glowed in the fading light, its walls no longer whispering sorrow, but humming softly, contentedly. I took a deep breath and whispered to the empty room, "We're home now, all of us." And for the first time in a very long life, I knew it was true. If you stayed with me till the end, my dear, thank you. Tell me the time and country you're watching from in the comments. It warms my old heart knowing where my stories travel. And if this story touched something quiet inside you, don't go just yet. There are more stories in this house, waiting for someone like you to listen.